from the News Channel 5 network. This is OpenLine.
Okay, thanks.
Luxen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Tonight, we are going to have a discussion about how recent COVID-19 legislation could potentially impact people with disabilities here in Tennessee. Over the next hour, we want to involve you in this conversation. There will be a phone number at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, we would love to include you in our discussion tonight. Our guest tonight is the Executive Director of the Tennessee Disability Coalition, Carol Westlake. Carol, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Happy to be here.
Thanks. And I want to start with just a little bit about the Tennessee Disability Coalition. Tell me a little bit about your history with the organization and what all it does.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So the Coalition is about a 30-year-old organization. I have been with the Coalition the entire 30 years, so I'm pretty used to doing this work. It is an alliance of about 42 different disability organizations, and it really got started as a way for members of our community to work together. There's some disability organizations that might represent somebody with or groups with particular kinds of disabilities. For example, the League for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, or the Federation for the Blind, or a variety of things like that. And then there are other organizations that work on employment for people with disabilities, or do things particularly in assistive technology, for example. And but everybody has this same interest about making sure that people with disabilities have access to the supports and services they need to lead full and productive lives, right? And so how can we all work together to do that? And we formed a coalition where we could share interests, share ideas, and then work together to get good public policy that supports people and their families.
And just tell me a little bit about, for you personally, what has it been like working so many years? Obviously, you're passionate about this cause, and what kind of impact you've been able to have over that time.
And I am passionate about this cause because I'm just a firm believer in community. And I know so many people with disabilities who just needed a chance to have an opportunity to be able to work, to be able to have a family, one thing and another, and who can be really good self-advocates if they have supporters. And so that's what I've always tried to be. We have done a variety of things over the years. I think one of the first things we did at the Coalition is in the late 80s and early 90s, we were able to pass a program called the Family Support Program. And it started out as a very small program. It is still in existence. It's run now by the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, and is operated in community-based organizations across the state. And it provides just a little bit of help to families, who have a family member with a disability. And it might be, you can be a family of one. Maybe it's a person with a disability. There's a lot of added costs, a lot of added work in systems, a lot of added stuff that goes along with having a disability or having a family member with a disability. And just a little bit of help to kind of get that leg up. If you have a disability or a child with a disability, for example, in your family, and she's 12 or 13, has some intellectual disabilities, you can't just hire an average babysitter necessarily for her, right? Because most 12 and 13-year-olds aren't having babysitters anymore. So there's a program called Respite Care that the Family Support Program can help fund and link you to someone who can come and be with your family members so that you could have a night out, or maybe so that you can go to the grocery store, because not everybody can step away when they've got caretaking responsibilities. So it's really a support to caregivers and that kind of thing. But building that program over time has been something that's been really important to us. We've done a lot of work in special education to try to make sure that kids have what they need at school. We worked really hard over the years to make sure that kids who are on the autism spectrum could get the supports and services they needed through private insurance. Particularly kinds of the behavior analysis services and interventions that are needed so that they can have full lives. So it sort of runs a gambit of things. And then just in the last couple of years, we worked with our legislature and the TennCare Bureau to establish a program that's called the Katie Beckett waiver that is works with kids who have complex medical needs and whose families might make a little bit too much money to be on Medicaid. And need those kinds of supports and services that the Medicaid program or the TennCare program provides. Commercial insurance is really good for well child visits, and it's really good if you have a short-term illness, that sort of thing, to work on stuff. But for kids who have chronic medical problems that are lifelong, insurance isn't really designed for that. So we were working on a program that, again, provides that kind of support that families need so that they can raise children to be as healthy and as successful as possible.
And I'm sure that work means a lot to those families. I'm sure you hear a lot of thank yous and appreciation from them throughout the years.
And we do, but I will also say that we hope that families also help us and help systems work better. Because not all things that we try to make helpful are helpful, and so we have to really listen to families as well to say this does or doesn't work for us. Because you don't want to make the burden greater. So it really is a partnership, I think, with individuals with disabilities and with families. Self-advocacy is so important, and really listening to what people say they want and need is really, really critical. I've had to learn to be a really good listener. I've got thousands of great ideas, but sometimes my ideas aren't the right ones.
That's right. You got to be open to anything. That's a good approach. And it's important to note that disabilities can take on lots of different forms, right? And I assume that you're working with folks with a variety of different circumstances. Is that right?
And that's really true. So for example, there are folks who may be disabled by a serious illness, right? If there are folks who have cancer, who it causes disabilities for them. Not everybody, but certainly some folks. So there are people who are born with a disabling condition. There are people who acquire it. We have friends who are adults in the disability world in what's called the independent living movement, folks who are really trying to lift themselves and others up. And they always refer to people who don't have disabilities as tabs or temporarily able-bodied, because they say that, if you're lucky enough to live long enough, you will probably experience a disability, maybe short-term, maybe longer-term, right? But even those disabilities that come with old age for many people are sort of part of what we take a look at. So it could be something like multiple sclerosis, right? It could be cerebral palsy, which is something that maybe you're born with and creates some physical disabilities. Spinal cord injuries, traumatic brain injuries are really one of the leading causes of disability in children, interestingly enough. And it's automobile accidents, and it's bicycle accidents, and it's sporting accidents. So the range of disability is very broad, and you can't say this is what everybody with disabilities needs, because people have really unique needs caused by their particular kind of disability or disabling condition.
Is there a way to estimate how many Tennesseans would fall into one of those categories?
So there is. So the general definition for disability that is kind of tracked on the census and other kinds of things is a pretty broad definition that the Americans with Disabilities Act uses. And by that estimate, and looking at census data, there's about 1.6 million Tennesseans who have a disability of all ages. So it's close to 30% of the population.
I think that would surprise a lot of people to hear that. We're talking about, this impacts a lot of people here in our state for sure.
It really does. And not everybody necessarily self-identifies as having a disability. I always tell this story. My father, who is now gone, but in his later years, he ended up having to have part of his leg amputated because of diabetes and vascular issues, right? And I made the mistake one day. So they started using a wheelchair. He had a prosthetic, but he was older and easier to get around in a wheelchair. And I actually made the mistake of referring to him one day as having a disability. And he said to me, "I don't have a disability, I'm just old." And I was like, "Well, Daddy, you lost part of your leg, and you use a wheelchair, and that's kind of but he didn't think of himself that way. And that's fine. But he did have to ask for accommodations sometimes, or some needs a ramp to get into the restaurant, or whatever that kind of thing is. So I think people would be surprised to know that about 30% of Tennesseans have a disability of one variety or another.
And you mentioned a few moments ago the state legislature, which is what we're going to kind of get into for the rest of our program tonight. You guys obviously watching very closely what's going on at the Capitol as far as legislation that may impact individuals with disabilities. Just kind of explain how that relationship works, or what you would do when legislators are in session typically.
So, well, when the legislature's in session, we do a lot of bill tracking. You know, we kind of look every day to see who's doing something and what they're doing, and sort of we play a little bit of defense sometimes when something happens that we think is going to negatively impact people with disabilities. Then we will oftentimes go down. Some of our staff will go down, other kinds of things, and have some conversations about that with legislators. We share that information with our constituents so that they can contact their legislator if they choose to do that. So we do a little training about that kind of advocacy for folks, because I mean, the most powerful thing is your personal story, right? You know, if something's going to affect you that your senator or representative is looking at or might be sponsoring, it really is. This is democracy at its best, is to be able to go and sort of have a conversation about that and explain why what's happening would be good or would not be good for folks, for you, for yourself, and for other people who are similarly situated. We also work outside of session with legislators to try to educate them and hopefully get people, legislators of one variety or another, who will be willing to sponsor legislation that will improve things for people with disabilities. So, you know, an issue that we want to take on and that we hope that we can make happen. But the biggest thing we do every year is we do what we call Disability Day on the Hill or Disability Advocacy Day. And generally, pre-COVID, we had a couple hundred people every year that would come down to the legislature to meet with their legislator, to learn a little bit about the process, you know, to sit in on a committee meeting and learn how that happened, and to meet with their legislator and talk about the issues that were important to them. So that's always been a really exciting time. And, you know, not everyone, legislators, staff people, others, have had experiences with people with disabilities. And so it can be really powerful to see that people are out and about and have opinions, you know, and can operate in the world. So.
And of course, you mentioned COVID-19, which has been the hot topic for everyone across the board over the last year and a half, 2 years. We're going to talk more about that right after the break, but stay with us. We'll be right back with more with Carol Westlake. Stay with us.